Good evening. On behalf of Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet, we welcome you to the launch of Hinge, rediscovering emotional and mental wellness. Author Vandana Kohli and psychologist Sheena Mishra Ghosh will be in conversation with Malavika Banerjee. A quick introduction to our panelists. Vandana Kohli is a filmmaker and educator in film, history, and commerce from the best schools of India. Vandana has won awards for excellence at each institute. She majored in film editing from FTII and has attended the I'm sorry, I've missed this bit. Vandana has received acclaim for her films on anger and depression. She has served twice on the jury for the National Film Awards. Vandana loves to sing and play old Indian film songs. Sheena Mishra Ghosh is consultant psychologist at AMRI Hospital, Fortis Hospital, and Apollo Clinic. She specializes in helping children and teenagers and their beleaguered mothers. Malavika Banerjee is director, Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet, and she will take forward this conversation. Over to you, Malavika.
Thank you, Shukonna. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all our friends who've joined us on Facebook Live and the Kolkata Literary Meet page, as well as those who've joined us on the Zoom link. It gives me a lot of joy to present to you somebody who I knew 30 years ago when India was under the prime ministership of VP Singh, and parents would worry about the terrible influence of cable television on children. And today here she is writing a book in a different India where there's a new prime minister, of course, there's Narendra Modi, but parents are still worried about the evil effects of over the top OTT on their kids. Times have changed, and it's wonderful to see Vandana Kohli write a book, Hinge, which is about mental health and rediscovering emotional wellness and mental wellness and emotional wellness as well. And with her is psychologist Sheena Mishra Ghosh. And she too was an old friend of mine from school. So it feels very cozy and wonderful that we are all speaking to each other after knowing each other for decades. I will now jump straight into the conversation. And Kohli, as I will call her, so I'm warning you about that. She was the first VK I knew. So, Kohli, what prompted you to write this book? You've been a filmmaker. You have dealt with issues of mental health in the past, and what prompted you to write down your experiences? There are several examples in this book. The research is extensive, and your own diagnosis draws from not only your research and your conversations with professionals in the mental health space, but also from our ancient texts. So, what made Hinge come together? Can you just talk us through the process and the reasons for writing this book?
Thank you, Mala, and hi, Sheena, and thank you for having me on this platform. It's a delight, a pleasure to be here with you. Well, really, the causes for writing Hinge were the reasons for writing Hinge were to find causes to emotional and mental anguish. And when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, and even before that, if you remember, Mala, the central message of popular culture used to be that, you know, if you have access to material resource, then all your problems will be solved, or most of them will be solved. And that narrative continues even today. Maybe it's strengthened today. And I think that is a misleading narrative. Because even for those who have the means of living in place, emotional and mental anguish only seems to be getting worse. So then where do the triggers lie? Do some of them lie in our social spaces, in our social structures, in our social relationships, maybe in our definition of normal, which is what I think, which is what Hinge looks at in section 1. And triggers lie in us not being adequately acquainted with emotions, with certain emotions. How do they work? What do they prod in us? How do they impact us, not just us, but even others around us? Particularly anger, depression, and stress, all of which have grown exponentially in these times, and maybe because of the systems which are in use and the systems that are overwhelming in their speed and in the volume of information that they bring to us. And these systems are here to stay. So if the outer is beyond our control, and if the outer is leading us increasingly to distress, then can we turn to certain tools within? What are those tools? How do we access them? Can we hone certain skills so that irrespective of the outer, irrespective of time, of age, and of milieu, we are able to find spaces of restfulness, spaces of stability, and spaces of equanimity. Equanimity. I always stumble on that word. But really, to what is it that will lead us to equipoise? So I think these were broadly the considerations that that determined the framework within which I structured Hinge, and I also made 3 sections out of them, basically to look for these triggers.
Okay. So Kohli mentioned that, there are 3 sections to her book, and also what prompted her to write the book. So Sheena, uh, you know, there was a time where going to a shrink, the broad term for it, was considered stigmatizing. And yet there have been concerns, at least through my adult life over the last 30 years, about the impact of, what is normal. Kohli's book at length discusses the fact that something that's normal for a person in one context is completely unacceptable in another. She's used the example of the joint family. So what is absolutely okay for a person who's grown up with 4 cousins and 3 siblings is not okay for someone who's grown up in a nuclear family. And if someone from that family is married into the family of a joint family, there are problems of, which really impact the mental space. So, many Indias are always at I wouldn't say at conflict, but at crosshairs at many points. So as a psychologist, how do you see the term normal? Because the first third of her book is about normal. So what is normal from a psychologist's point of view?
Okay. Thank you, Mala, and thank you. Hi, Vandana. Thank you for having me over. And hello, everybody. So the thing is that I went through the book and I found the book a very lucid illustration of, various relationships, various levels, and this book in 3 parts. It really helps to understand, because the thing is that it's very relatable, and the examples that are shared are something to do with our everyday lives. So it's a very easy read. People who will go through it, and they will sort of immediately feel some kind of a connect, some kind of a link with the book. Now, what exactly is normal, Mala? Actually, it is an illusion. Normal is an illusion. What is a party time for a spider is actually chaos for a fly. So that's the way the saying goes. But the thing is that when we talk about what is normal in the book, who decides it? Like, is it joint families versus nuclear families? Is it good versus the bad? Is it homosexuality versus heterosexuality, or other genders? Or is it and many more examples that she sort of brought in front of us. But in psychology itself, there is, of course, a broad definition of normalcy, because in order to understand a person's problem, in order to measure a person's problems, then one needs to define normalcy. Only if you have a structure will you be able to sort of define that. So basically what psychology says is that if there is the freedom from any kind of incapacitating internal conflicts, when you are free of that and you're more or less functioning on a normal level, it is it is basically what they are calling as normal, or the capacity to think and act in an organized and reasonably effective manner. When you're being able to put your act together in an organized manner, that is what their psychologists are calling normal. The ability to cope with the ordinary demands and problems of life, and the ability to cope, freedom from extreme emotional distress or anxiety or depression, some deep, when you're not perhaps affected by very deep clinical mental illnesses like depression or anxiety, or as the book said, bipolarity, or any kind of mental illness, they say is normal. So it is basically that. But the stigma that you talk about, Mala, is still exists today, in the sense that when it depends a lot upon the the if I should use this term, the class of people who come for sessions, for therapy. People who are less aware about it are more open to therapy, frankly, because if they're looking helter-skelter for some kind of help, if somebody tells them that go to a psychologist, your child's problems will you will be able to overcome the problems, then they rush to a psychologist. But a person from the higher strata of society, they don't want to sort of make their own personal problems so public. There are things of confidentiality, judgments and judgmentalism, or whatever you may call it. Because of these factors, they don't want to very openly and easily come to for a therapy session. So these are definitely issues that are still stigma in our society. And about when parents or when family members want to understand what is normal, I'm sure there are certain rules in the family, and if the family members are not sticking to those rules, they're not conforming, then they feel that something is going wrong with the family member, and then they want to seek help for that. So I think broadly that is what it is. And even if you talk about not normal, being normal, new normal, there's no factors that are in common. So the distribution is skewed. There's a tilt in any of the three situations. So it is very difficult to define and say that this is what is normal. Who decides it? It's very difficult. So I think best if the awareness is there for the person to understand that I'm not feeling good about something. I think that's the best part when you need to sort of reach out for help.
Okay. So one of the reasons people are increasingly reaching out for help, as Sheena would call it, is a sense of aloneness that comes with depression. The interesting part about the book is there are several examples across various challenges that one may face, but the examples which you gave about depression were particularly heart-rending as well as scary. How it can just exacerbate and become a situation where somebody doesn't want to get out of bed at some point, where just waking up and getting ready and just basic personal hygiene becomes a challenge, which is almost insurmountable. So what was the research you did for your for the part of the book which was on depression? I'd first talk about depression and then go to anger. So specifically about depression, how a breach forms and how people then react and are unable to cope. What made the session so hard to read in a way almost?
Well, Mala, in 2002, 2003, I made a film on depression, on major depression. It was called Into the Abyss. And at that time, it was the first film on depression in an urban Indian context. I made it in English. And I did a lot of research for it back then. And I think actually that started my interest in the working of the human mind. I didn't quite realize that it was such an all-consuming interest, because I used to keep a journal myself. But that also helped me in my own research, because I began to see patterns, how thoughts and emotions can become just loops and circles and patterns that you're caught in. So that was what actually began my research in depression. I spoke to a lot of people back then. And then continuing from there onwards, in the middle, I was commissioned, amongst other projects. I did a film on biotechnology, which was very fundamental in my making, understanding even more about the human mind and the mechanism of action of certain emotions and body and physiology and receptors and neurotransmitters and what have you, and genes and coding and basic blocks and enzymes. Biotechnology was a very big project, and I had to read it. As a documentary filmmaker, you have to study the subject, especially if you're commissioned, or even if it's out of your own interest, to be able to understand it well enough, first to interview the experts you want to interview, and second is to have a clear, lucid idea of the topic, so that you as a filmmaker are able to communicate it further to your audience. So that's what remains with every project when one works on documentary. It's this whole gamut of different subjects and different spaces and different people that you have met, which in your own course of things in your life, you may or may not have an opportunity. You may not have, any reason to go into such spaces. So after the film on depression, through biotechnology, and then coming to anger, all through this period, I met with experts, I spoke with experts, I spoke with people. We had so many interviews for both the films. Even after that, that there was so much, I think there was most material that I didn't use. And there are certain common strains as well. When you talk about depression being so debilitating that, it reaches a point when you don't want to get out of bed, one is struck by how common that thread is, that narrative is in cases of major depression. In fact, that's one of the main signs of major depression or severe depression. And we tend to not realize it and not know it. And, somebody else did a book reading recently, and the lady who was hosting it is an artist. And she said, I wish I'd read your book. I wish you had written it earlier, because I saw my mom going through the same trajectory, and I didn't realize. And even though I consulted somebody, he told me it's all right, it's just age related. And I didn't recognize that this was what she was sinking into. So a lot of research, speaking to a lot of people, and interviewing many experts from different streams, right from psychology, psychiatry, neuroscience, behavioral economics, counselors, and people, voices from amongst us. That's what lit it.
Okay. So just staying with that thought, Kohli. So there are stories about young children also who get hooked on to the internet and gaming and that whole universe, and how their situation, a lot of depression is also cutting yourself off. So do you think the story, my question being, do you think the story of what the triggers is changing gradually in the 20 years between your film and your book?
I don't particularly think the triggers, yes, the triggers are changing, but the trajectory remains the same to a large extent. I think that there's first a sense of intrusion. You are moving ahead in a certain direction, and there is an intrusion. It could be a failed opportunity. It could be a failed relationship. It could be just your sense of entitlement not being met. It could be many things. And that kind of causes a tear in your narrative. And you get stuck at that point, even as time is moving ahead. And your vision becomes more and more backwards. And you're not able to process as time moves on. This load between what happened back then and what is happening now, this is just piling up. Things are just piling up. I don't know if you recall, but in the book there is this image of this analogy of all these clothes piling up, all needing to be
Yes,
ironed, but your
yes.
attention is stuck on one which has a tear in
Exactly.
it, or has a burn in it. So you come to a point when you are so consumed by why that happened and what may have led to it, and your mind is buzzing, that you are really unprepared to face the day. You feel unprepared to get out of bed. So I think in that sense, the trajectory remains the same mostly. The triggers certainly may change. I feel that we are living in more potent times now when it comes to triggers, because there is a certain, at least we perceive a lack of resilience. We talk about it all the time, whether it's physical or whether it's emotional or whether it's mental. I think when things are so speeded up, our reactions, we are reacting all the time. We have become more reactionary. Everything has to be instant, so everything is calling for instant reactions, which means that we are using many parts of our brain which are meant for thought, deep thought, which is not being used. We have less and lesser spaces of emotional stability, because you're reacting all the time and you're just trying to deal with all this that's coming at you. So there's very little space to process what's going on within us, and therefore a prick can lead to a disproportionate reaction.
Reaction.
So, Sheena, as I said, the stories of depression, the way we get stuck with one intrusion, as Kohli calls them, and then are unable to move past it. The various triggers that are now, adding and mounting in modern life, the pace of life itself. So, our cases of depression, we keep hearing it's literally the epidemic. That's a word one uses carefully these days, of our times. So what, as a psychologist, is your understanding of depression in 2021?
Okay, so Mala, I would like to just point out something here. Say about 3 to 4 years ago, about 2015, 16, some of the doctors, we were having a discussion, and a couple of the doctors said that by 2020, diabetes and heart issues will be the first, would be the top raging diseases, and very closely followed by depression. And come 2020, we saw the change. We saw that the pandemic and what sort of a change it brought into people. So of course there was a big, huge sort of an oscillation, if I must say, from a very, very speedy life to action packed life to a total stopping of everything. So as Vandana has very correctly put it, what happens is, in depression and anger, I would say they are like 2 points of the same axis, if I may say it that way. Because depression is something when you are going through, periods of feeling low, feeling hopeless, not wanting to even step out of bed and doing your daily chores, or even your self care, or even your household tasks, nothing. On the other hand, and you're internalizing the whole thing, you are basically having a constant what should I say, it's a sort of a mental dialogue, that mental monologue that you're having with yourself, that nothing is working for me. You're blaming yourself, and she has mentioned this in the book very well, that you're constantly blaming yourself. Nothing good happens to me, nothing positive happens to me. Why me? Why does everything, all the wrongs happen to me? You're internalizing the whole thing towards yourself, and then when there is no other way out, you end up doing a lot of more risky negative acting out of behavior, where where children, young people are also cutting their hands. They are either they're trying to leave the house, or they're in and out of relationships. They don't want to stick to a constant and on the other hand, anger is a total outburst, wherein again you're blaming, but you're blaming another person. totally outside of you, because you did this, I got angry. Because you turned the car, I got angry. And this sense of entitlement, and that I should, my expectations should be met, and I should be catered to, in anger. That is one very, very strong sort of a feature that anger has. And in both the cases, actually, it's important that there's a lot of work to be done with the society around us, with the triggers around us, but a lot of work also needs to be done with the person per se, like with the mind, and with the mind and the psychology of the person. That is very important, because uh, intolerance towards difference is what is today's key,
Yes,
whatever
I was
I
coming
should
to
say.
that. Yes.
Yeah, because anything you're different from me means I need to either get angry, or I need to totally shut up, or not give my views, not give my opinions. So this intolerance needs to definitely, is something, I think it's more a personal thing. One does learn it through conditioning over a period of time as they grow up, but even once they grow up, and because perhaps there are two generations, in two time frames, like parents were bringing up these kids in another separate time frame altogether, and now kids grow up in a totally different time frame. So little bit of self learning, little bit of self awareness, I mean, the internet, the media also gives is a gateway to a lot of good things as well. Why should we always stick to and pick up the wrong things? So there's always a
Positive
the better
upside to it.
things to learn. Yes. So I think that people should take more awareness, more they should have ownership and have takes the sense of responsibility. And they should also think that there has to be some change in me, not just because I was a part of an abusive family. I don't need to carry that burden throughout my life. Of course of course that has a very strong impact in your adult life. It reflects in your adult life directly. But if people do think that, no, I need to take ownership of this and I need to bring about a change. I don't want to do the same things as what my parents did. I don't want to make the same mistakes as my parents did. And I want to bring about the change. I think there will be a change, and there will be, and therein lies the need for awareness, the need for more learning, the need for more knowledge.
Okay. So Sheena's talking a lot about anger, which I was coming to you about, which is again something you had worked on earlier as well. You had made a film on anger, and there too, like Sheena has mentioned, you've given a lot of stories, a lot of examples. There was one which is very similar to what Sheena said about a person called Maya, a girl who got married and into a family which didn't understand her ambitions. And sorry, she came back from outside and stayed with her family rather. And there was this disagreement about her staying at home, and she needed her space. So stories of these sorts where there is a generation, there's a disagreement among within the way generations see life and the role of people in their space. So anger, what made you work so intensely about with anger to make a film? And then I think it's one of the hinges of your book as well.
Mala, I do want to say that drawing from our conversation so far, that normal also, and whether it's depression also, I think normal is, to my mind, is fluid. So like you said, as the example that Sheena gave, that what is party time for the spider is terrible time for the fly. So I think the book really doesn't put forth more definitions, rather than it questions certain definitions, and it tries to so that we don't repeat the same things that maybe we have experienced. I think that's to a large part the purpose of the book.
Like breaking a loop.
Yes, somewhere we need to break it. And when you're young, one finds it difficult to accept certain things and wants to rebel against everything, which is fine. That's how youth is. And as we grow older and we begin to see, I think I've begun to see more truth in certain things that I couldn't see, I couldn't accept earlier. I could see the reasons for it. I could see I'm more accepting of them today. But at the same time, I have to remind myself this is exactly how I felt when I was younger. So I think it's somewhere where the twain shall meet or should meet. And I think one of the main reasons for writing the book is to make the reader probably feel where he or she can break that loop for their own sakes, for their own families, for their own loved ones, and for their own selves. That is was a very strong imperative. In terms of anger, well, anger is a very, very powerful emotion. And it's difficult to process it. I think it has to be processed. You can't suppress it or repress it. It just leads to more anger. But how? So that's the other thing that the book tries to do. In section 2, which is Unhinge, is to throw an objective analysis on emotions that otherwise we are so gripped by. We are caught in their grip. And in anger, what happens is you feel like you have you're moving ahead and there's so much happening within, but actually, as the book says, it's like a dragon eating its own tail. You're caught in a loop of anger, or you're just swirling around the edge of an abyss. There's all this motion and tumult and activity, but you're stuck in one plane. And I think it is important to have that that visual in your mind when one tends to get angry over and over again. Why did I deal with anger? Because I found at one point in time that I was extremely angry. And I was never an angry person. You know me from college. Anger was not something that, at least I don't think I was angry. I don't know if you have a different view.
No, you were an absolute, you were not an angry person. I wouldn't say you didn't have your little rough sides, but anger wasn't one of your fatal.
Oh, of course. No, absolutely. I was never an angry person. I was never an angry child. I was never an angry young adult. But I think in my 30s, I was just raging. And when that happened to me, I felt so out of my skin. I just felt that this is not me. And I found that I was caught in a pattern of reaction. And I reached a point when it became so much. And I implode. My thing of anger is all this while that I was imploding, so it may have seemed very calm on the exterior, but it wasn't. I reached a point when I thought to myself, there has to be another way. There has to be another way to deal with this. There has to be another way to approach this, because it's all consuming. It burns you up within. It consumes it. It takes so much of your energy that it just, it's like the Buddha says, it's like holding hot coal in your hand. You think you're going to fling it at somebody, but it's burning you up. So that's what actually, and then I would literally practice that every time I felt angry and I found the same triggers and the same story, because it becomes a circuit. The circuit in your brain becomes stronger and stronger, and it takes lesser and lesser to spark that circuit. Your first reaction to anything and everything is an angry one, whether you articulate it or not. And I feel that that's happening to a lot of people. And I think some of it comes from stress, which is why I keep coming back to the times we're living in, because if we are aware that stress can do this to us, stress can lead to chronic anger, then we are more mindful about, and we have a greater vision about what's happening within us. And we have hopefully a chance for a greater handle on things. So that was one reason that I made the film on anger. To see different, and I traveled internationally for it, and I was very fortunate to find some of the world's leading experts who spoke in it, because anyone I wrote to and said that I'm doing a film on anger and this is what I'm trying to put in the film gave me an interview. They said yes. And the thing that helped me was that because I had such wonderful experts who were willing to speak, I had to read on their research. I had to know their work. I had to understand their work. And this meant even brain scientists, neuroscientists and people who were doing research on circuits and so many other things. So that really expanded one's own understanding of not only the emotion, but also of many other related, things around it. And I feel that that is the bane of our times. We are reactionary. I said this earlier, that, when you are under pressure, and there's all this coming at you, and you don't have a space to catch your breath, or you don't feel collected, you don't have the space to feel collected, it is natural for us to become more and more reactionary. And when things are addictive, let me give you an example. I pick up my phone to send somebody a message. And instead of going straight to that person on WhatsApp, I check the 10 messages that have come in. And by the time I look at them and I respond to them, or I forget that I was supposed to.
This happens all the time.
Yes, right. And then before you realize it, 20 minutes are gone or half an hour is gone. It's addictive, and it's designed to be addictive. I don't have to tell you how that psychologists are taken on board to make all it more and more addictive, whether it's video games, whether it's the apps that are there that we are following or using. So let's it's here to stay. I'm not saying that they are not helpful. They are helpful. We're all dependent on them. They have their uses. But I think the onus is on each one of us to know that there's this much engagement which is of use. There's this much more than that, which is hollowing me out. It's consuming my time and putting me more under pressure than being of use. And I think that is something that each of us has to determine for ourselves. So there is a sense of balance that we need to look at. And I think the book actually, even though it speaks in the section 2, Unhinge, it can get dark at times because it's dealing with the dark emotions. I think that it tries to look at it objectively so that we have a better grip over it for ourselves, as well as we're able to recognize it in people around us, and are in a position to not only help them, but help ourselves also. And I do want to say one last thing. When I started writing the book, when I first conceived of the book, I named it Unhinged, because the whole focus of the book at that point was these dark emotions and their trajectories and how they work. And then something happened in the middle. There was a break, and I couldn't get down to writing for a couple of years. And when I came back to it, I realized that was not enough. It's not enough for me to write about Unhinged. And so it became the second section of the book. And the third section, therefore, it doesn't try, but I feel leaves one with enough constructive ways to move on, how to find that sense of flow again. But I won't jump the gun. Coming back to you.
We'll go to the third part. But in Unhinged and at length in the third part of the book, when we grow up and we're getting angry and our parents tell us count 10. So basically they're telling us to pause. They were telling us to pause. So the need to pause and the almost the luxury to pause seems to have gone out of our lives in many. There's a great deal of admiration for people who can ad-lib and improv and be, quick off the cuff. So in these times, Sheena, if you can just talk us through the importance of just that quiet period which you need to pause and weigh what is happening in your situation. It could be a small challenge, it could be a large one.
Yeah. So Mala, in psychology, and especially in cognitive behavior therapy, what is told through the therapy is you are the main person. I mean, what you've gone through, your parents, your family, your background, all that is there, but it is you who has to bring about the change. So because you are the person who's reaching out for your issues. So throughout this, when you talk about depression, when you talk about anxiety, when you talk about anger, that it's in the book also, Vandana speaks so beautifully about choices, that a person, as she was getting very stressed out, she realized that every day planning a meal was very stressful for her. So she just stuck to one particular thing through her workload or something, period of workload. So that
Even
is
dressing up.
yeah,
Kohli knows what she's
exactly.
going to wear next
Just
Wednesday.
her black trousers, I think. Yes, I remember that. So, exactly my point. So, it is a choice, even when you are angry or you're depressed. What is the choice of response you make actually uh, gives rise to your reaction. So if somebody, for example, is making a face at you, from far away, is making a face at you, you can, as by choice, either just ignore or make the same face, or go up to that person and slap that person, or just laugh and say, oh, what a crazy person this is. So the thing is that it is, number one, it's a very empowering feeling when you feel that you are the one who is choosing what response you want to choose, and what reaction will thereafter come out of that situation. So it is people feel uh, quite connected to this sort of therapy. And then as you said about biotechnology, biochemistry, and all the new neurodevelopment things, all these reactions, there is a lot of point, there's a lot of space where one needs to really focus on the thoughts that run through our mind right after a situation takes place. And if we focus on that thought, immediately you'll see that, and if you're able to sort of challenge those thoughts, that why am I thinking this way, this is only my part of thought, which I think is right, but there could be another way of looking at the whole situation, which I'm totally turning a blind eye to. So, when the whole picture is seen, then maybe perhaps a person is able to get a little grip over his or her emotions like that. Otherwise, constantly this thing that things are not going right, the education system is wrong, my family is not right, my workplace is not, I'm not happy in my workplace, my boss is constantly behind me, you will find some little trigger or some little excuse all the time to feel angry about, to feel depressed about, to feel um, any negative emotion, I would say. So um, even though depression is a very, very deep and serious issue, but with medication, this kind of therapy also helps, because once once the patient is able to cognitively receive, with the help of medicines, with severe depression, thereafter little bit of therapy should be given on focusing more on choices, focusing more on what are the negative thoughts, automatic negative thoughts, we call it ants. What are the ants in your head? And just stick around and challenge those negative thoughts. Each time there is a negative thought and you feel that, oh my god, I am not important in this, my mother doesn't give me importance, nobody cares about me, maybe from a very generic thought, there's a very specific negative thought, and by the end of the whole line, you feel that nobody loves me. That is basically the truth you're working on, that is the conditioning you're working on. But that it is not right, you need to challenge it and substitute it with more evidence and a more positive thought. And
So,
that's what works, I guess. I don't know, I don't know whether I could explain
no,
it to
no,
you,
yes,
Yes,
but
certainly, certainly.
definitely.
Absolutely.
but
I do agree. I think there's a very, I think it was a French saying, which I heard many, many years ago. It said, if the going is easy, you're going downhill. I think what negative thoughts is that, once you're in that negative zone, then you tend to take anything that comes to you and look at it from that lens, because it's the easy
right.
to do. It's easy to blame.
Mhm.
It's easy to feel negative.
Absolutely,
Easy
absolutely.
to feel victimized, and
Right.
you begin to revel in it, and it's a real problem. I mean, I don't mean to trivialize it in any way. um, and I think there are people who've been through terrible episodes and have all the reason to feel victimized, but I think it doesn't take us ahead. It's not helping us it doesn't take us, and which is why Unhinged concentrates on trying to say things as objectively as possible, so that if you have an objective lens, you can work from unhooking, to unhook yourself from the grip of that.
For example, Vandana, you mentioned a lot about abuse in your book, and if we may make a little note of that. See, the thing is, again, in an abusive relationship, the perpetrator and the victim, forever the victim may feel, that I am always in this space of a victim or a position of a victim, and throughout the life the person may feel that there was something wrong in me for which this sort of a thing happened to me, and again that loop, that maybe I'm doing something wrong,
blame,
and therefore,
anger, guilt.
yeah, blame, anger, and that loop. So somewhere, the victim needs to be made to feel little empowered, that come on, now it is time that you need to rethink and reframe your narrative. And there is also another very strong positive parallel narrative that is moving ahead with you, and you need to just sort of change your focus. And yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I agree completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
In fact,
yes,
sorry,
go ahead, Kohli, go ahead.
There was a bridge. There is this well-known bridge in San Francisco. I think it's the Golden Gate, which is infamous for suicides. And there was a team that set up a camera. This a few years ago, and there was a help team to stop people from committing suicide, and they were able to save quite a few. And then they interviewed them, those who were willing, and they found a common strain. Actually, they found that most of them were extremely angry, and a lot of them had been abused as children. So that anger you carry to a point, that guilt and anger and blame.
Right.
But I do want to stress that, and I don't mean to in any way, like I said, take away from the seriousness of abuse, which is why I talk about it a fair amount. But everything is relative. The point is, how much angst is there within you? What is causing your angst? It could be something innocuous. It could be just the environment you were brought up in, and therefore your reactions are a certain way. And it could be something as momentous as abuse. Right. But the fact is, whatever that is, whatever the cause, now that this is happening, how do we move on from here? And I think that's why that's what the book tries to do. At least I hope that's what it tries. You all have read it, and I would be more curious to know, in fact, how effective or not effective you think it is, in terms of dealing with these emotions.
So I was just coming to that, in the third section, which I'm very glad you wrote, after the I also am more of a fiction reader, let's say. So all the pent up emotion of Unhinged was really taking me elsewhere. So then when you started to calm us all down with the third session of solutions, I was initially for a few pages a little dampened, but then I realized the wisdom in your ways. So one very fascinating part of the book is about the dynamics between courage and humility. You say courage is the fulcrum of humility. And there is great courage in realizing one is fallible, one can also make mistakes. And when somebody else is culpable, while one can be angry, one must also know that this is something that can happen from your side, is one side as well. So if you can just talk us through the idea of, humility and courage being two tools with which one can arrive at the equipoise you mentioned earlier in the discussion.
So really the battles are now the battles of the mind. We don't have opportunity to be courageous so much outside, at least in an urban scape or in our normal lives, in the normal course of our lives. As now we need to use courage to overcome just that the easy way out is to blame. The easy way out is to feel entitled. The easy way out is to feel self-righteous. I find that more dangerous than blaming and or anything else. When you feel that I'm so right, I am so right. That is a recipe for violence. So I think that it takes a certain amount of courage to confront the truth and to see things for the way they are, rather than to see things the way we'd like to see them, and to see them or believe they are the way that we want them to be. That surge is towards uncovering the truth is courage, to my mind. And I do say that it's the fulcrum of humility, because if courage is a surge towards uncovering the truth, then humility is a surrender to the truth. When you surrender to the fact that when you see the truth for what it is and you surrender to it and you realize that, this is what came from me, or this is how I'm seeing things, or this is my understanding of things, or this is where my whole worldview is coming from, and this is where my angst is coming from, this is why I'm reacting this way. When that opens up to you, it takes a certain, and surrendering to it is humility, to my mind. And I think actually when I wrote them as courage, humility. There was courage and M dash and humility. And in copy, it got changed to courage and humility. And I thought about changing it back, but then I let it be. Because to my mind, they're one word, or at least they're twins. They're complementary. They have to go together. So yes, and when we get to that point and we begin to make use of that, and we are able to surrender to things, we realize that if another person is acting from angst, is acting from pain, we see that pain, we see that insecurity, because we have seen it within us. We have acted from the same triggers. We have felt the insecurity, we felt anger, we felt entitlement, we felt self-righteous, and therefore, there's no point getting stuck in that loop again, because we see where that is going. It softens the impact of anyone else's negativity coming our way. We don't necessarily need to react with it or to it in the same way. And I think that is a breakthrough. When you're able to see your truth in somebody else, it, by that very act, softens the impact of whatever is the negativity that's coming to you, and puts one, and I speak for myself here, in a better position, a better handle, a better grip on and gives one more choice on how do you wish to engage. Do you wish to engage? That is also a choice. Do you wish to respond? Do you wish to react? Sometimes it calls for aggression, but your aggression is now coming from a conscious space. And there are times when you have to be aggressive, but then you know that there's a consequence to that. So that clarity, I think, comes when you use, when there is a surge of courage, and it leads you to a sense of humility, and you're able to see everyone in yourself, and yourself in everyone.
Okay. So before I take, there are a few questions that have come, especially from the Facebook audience. Sheena, so how empowering is this ability to be calm, to be reflective, and to actually, understand that there are polarities, but there is also in each, which I'll come to as my final question to Vandana, which is, how empowering is your ability to control these trigger emotions?
Right. Just where Vandana ended, when she talks about courage, courage in therapy would mean more of, when you're able to sort of come to terms with your own vulnerabilities.
Certainly.
Your own vulnerabilities, your own limitations. That this is where I was going wrong, and I brought about a little bit of change, and now I see things differently. I react to things differently. So when you come to terms with that and you are accepting of it, that is what is most important. You had spoken about resistance. There will be less resistance towards your own, each one of us, actually, we have a lot of conflicts within us. Constantly, we are fighting this against that. Something is going on within us when we are either, trying to find out what would be right, or this person, this is what I received. This is the behavior I received. Was it correct or was it not? So these sort of conflicts and within us, from outside, are what actually constantly form our shortcomings. So once we are able to be aware of these shortcomings, and we are able to understand that these are our limitations. Maybe I get angry about something, but I'm accepting of it. then, of course, the explosion, the volcanic reaction of anger definitely reduces. And the triggers are there. Of course, the triggers are there, but you are, because you're more aware, because you're more able to see through yourself, your own behavior, you're not that reactive. It's not that explosive. So that is one very important thing. And Mala, that you talk about, the bipolarity of course exists in every society, in every sphere of life. But of course, there is, again, when you are accepting of something. See, the thing is that a person who has undergone abuse, or who is undergoing abuse, for example, with a partner, you cannot expect that person to take a middle path and say, oh, it's all right, I'm accepting of what my partner has done, and I'm going ahead with him because overall he's a nice person. He's basically giving me, food to eat and shelter over my head, so I need to continue that. No, to confront that courage you of course need. You need to be assertive, you need to be firm, you need to of course tell him that just stop it here, you cannot go on this way. If you're going on this way, I will choose another path from this. But otherwise, if he is a sort of repentant, if he is sort of sorry about, he's apologetic, he knows that he's not going to repeat it, maybe then the person can, through therapy, also learn to forgive and to move on. Not forget, but of course to forgive and move on. But that is again a choice of that person. That will depend upon, not everybody is the same. So somebody may just, you have been abusive to me, so I will walk out. Right. Others may say, okay, no, let me give him a chance.
That is a choice which in Vandana and Kohli's world would be informed by a calm consideration rather than an angry reaction in an ideal world.
Yes.
Now, before I come to my question about spirituality, which I thought I'll just take one question from our audience questions, which are mounting. So there is a question from Subhalakshmi Gupta. How does mindfulness help one deal with anger? We've covered some of that, but is there anything more you'd like to add?
Well, mindfulness is basically being able to observe things as they unfold without any kind of judgment. And, I'm glad you said mindfulness because I think there are two basic, there are two functions of the mind. I think it's one is the voice of the mind, which we often confuse as the mind itself. The voice of the mind is the angry voice of the mind, or the stressed voice of the mind, or the entitled voice of the mind. And that, to my mind, is the small mind. But across texts, across traditions which have spoken about mind and mindfulness, they all say the same thing, that the nature of the mind is to observe. It's expansive and it's cognitive and alert and aware, and it observes without judgment. So I think it helps to know that when you're hearing these voices, that this is not my mind. This is the voice of my mind, and it's the stressed voice of my mind, or it's the angry voice of my mind. My mind is much larger than that. And I remember this, I remember Tenzing Palma, who gave us an example once in one of the workshops that I had attended. She said, the mind is like the sky, and all these obstructions that come and that seem like are the dark clouds in the sky. They're covering it up for temporarily, but they're not the mind. I think that was very useful as an analogy. So mindfulness, I think, really is that you are able to take a step back and say, just a minute, first let me observe things for the way they are. Give yourself a little bit of that space, and to halt judgment in that moment. And it's a practice. It sounds very easy, I know. We all know that. But it's a constant practice. And what helps is that, when one tries to practice it, you would probably, 10 times. Like when I was angry, I would say, no, I'm done with anger. I'm done with anger, and I would still get angry. And then, but slowly, as you understand, oh, this is how it works. This is its trajectory. This is the circuit that's getting sparked. And this is what it's saying in my mind. The more you get aware of it, the lesser the time for you to realize that, oh, this is my anger. I mean, lesser the time for me, the greater the space between the emotion and the expression. And therefore, the quicker I realize that this was anger. So earlier it would take me maybe 2 weeks to apologize. Then it began to take me, a week. Then it took me 2 days. Then it would make me 2 minutes. Now, sometimes when I get momentarily angry with my mom, I think we can still just allow ourselves that much. And I'm repentant. Immediately I realize, no, this is, and now, that was a little while ago. Now I feel that sometimes I feel irritated and with anybody, even with my own self, and I can catch myself at it. So it's really a practice, and you take 1 step forward, you take 4 steps back, you take 2 steps forward, you take 4 steps back, and that continues, but you stay with it. And so I find mindfulness is very useful. Yes.
So in all of this, you also mentioned entitlement. So there's a question from Garima Bose. The relationship between anger and entitlement, is it different when it's expressed among men and women?
Well, I think so. But Sheena, would you like to take this?
Yeah, this is actually Sheena's territory.
Yes, entitlement is, of course, part of anger, because I think entitlement comes with a lot of expectations. Like some people, they feel that this is what I'm supposed to expect out of certain situations, or certain people, or things around me. And when those expectations are not met, of course, the person feels that it is a right, that I should be getting what I want, and when I'm not getting it, there is an outburst of anger. And usually you will see a lot of this entitlement issues with people who are gravely narcissistic. They're more like, they have a personality disorder where they feel that everything that they do is right, and everything the other person in their in the close relationship or in their close partnership or whatever is doing wrong. So the partner is absolutely left bewildered and does not understand whether she or he should just take a right, whether it will be correct for the partner, or if he or she should take a left, and that would be all right for the partner. So anything, why did you make a call? That becomes a problem. Why didn't you call? That becomes a problem. So that is how strong this entitlement is in a narcissistic personality.
I feel very guilty about my dealings with my spouse.
And there is no insight to it. That is what the problem is. Like, these sort of people, they feel that they have the right to feel this way, and there is no insight, and what they feel is absolutely correct. It's a sort of a deluded world for them, wherein they're imagining their own things, and deriving and deducing their own conclusions. It's really little difficult to sort of deal with such people. And the problem is that these sort of people, they don't even realize, and because there is lack of insight, they don't realize that they need to go and do something about it and bring about some change in themselves.
Okay. So there are a couple of other questions, but before I go to them, Kohli, I would like you to briefly, allude to those parts of your Hinge third of the book, which is about the yin and the yang in Tai Jitu tradition, as well as the swasthya itself, which is the being still. So in all these Eastern traditions, I wouldn't use spiritual traditions, let's say, there is in the symbol of the yin and the yang, which is, I guess, the easiest to describe, there is the swirl of white with a dot of black, and there's the swirl of black with a dot of white. So it, and also the chant of 108, the sacredness of the number 108. So if you can just talk us through these hints to what we can find in our own traditions which make us more centered. Your last chapter is called Center. So what are these traditions which we can delve into and find more peace and stability, and as you call it, a center from which to, then explore all our relationships and our reactions?
Okay, I think yin and yang and 108 basically are talking about the fact that their bipolarity exists. It's the fundamental law of this realm that we inhabit, this band of energy. If there is an action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If there's day, there's night. Why? Because they give meaning to each other. You take one away. If it was day for 24 hours, it would mean nothing. Because there's the cyclical darkness of night, day means something. And so to see pain, pleasure, night and day, dark and light, not as conflicting, contrarian concepts to each other, but more as complementary to each other, that they together make a whole. So it's like inhalation and exhalation of the breath. I think just the concept of that, I've written about these because I find that these are age-old traditional concepts running through various traditions, metaphysical, philosophical, mind science traditions, and many of them point to us overcoming this either or, this or that. And I think that is often the problem when you're stressed, is often underlying our reality. That should I do this or that? He is all good or he's all bad. So that is what is pulling us into different directions. When we realize that bipolarity is complementary, they complement each other, we are accepting of both. And that's what the center talks about and thought talks about in Hinge, in the third section. How can we, through our mind, begin to accept certain things and break through our angst? It's difficult for me to elaborate, which is why I wrote it as a chapter. But I would just like to say that, and as you mentioned, the swirl of the black with the sea, they're not mutually exclusive. I think I mentioned it in Heart, the chapter on Heart, where all things dark are in want of love or in need of love, which is what you said, Sheena. You said that it boils down to, why wasn't I loved when you're in angst? So these are, I find that there are many traditions across the world which offer us beautiful concepts to work with. This is not philosophy, for the sake of philosophy. This is stuff which is applicable right here, right now. I can use it, and I have used it, and they work. So I won't call them spiritual traditions. I would call them more metaphysical or philosophical traditions, which we can make use of, which we can apply to make us effective at a practical on the practical plane. And I bring these concepts in, also the concepts of swasth, as you mentioned, swasthya, which is swa and stha. So swa is own and stha is to be established or to be centered. And I find that it's a revelation, because then that means that the concept of health is a sense of wholeness, and it's a sense of stability. So normal would therefore, for me, normal functioning would be a state where there is no excess of any one emotion. But is that kind of equilibrium possible? Is that kind of balance possible? I think it is, but it's a practice. So we may touch those points and then, of course, fall back into our default way of being, and then gather ourselves again. But as you practice it, it becomes more and more reality. And it's very much there for us to take and use and employ and make use of. So that's pretty much it. Center is my last chapter, and it's difficult for me to speak about it. But I will say this much. I mean, I hope you read the book. That's what
everyone should read the book. It's 200 pages, but it is a nice condensation of a lot of very important things about our times and the world we live in. So there are a couple of more questions on anger. So one is from Sanchari Mukherjee. Anger is such an overpowering emotion. How can an angry person process his or her anger? And Sajal Jana, who's also asking what people should do when angry. So let me rephrase that question and say, वंदना कोहली को गुस्सा क्यों आता है और जब गुस्सा आती है वो क्या करती है?
मैं किताबें लिखती हूँ. No, really, I think the chapter on anger is quite fluid, and I hope it's effective. I do encourage you to take a look, glance through it. It talks about various aspects. In fact, I think Unhinged speaks about anger throughout, right from depression to blame to anger. And I'm encouraging, and I would be very encouraged if you read the book also, because there is a certain trajectory that every section and every chapter follows.
But you've not answered गुस्सा क्यों आता है?
मुझे गुस्सा इसलिए मुझे बहुत गुस्सा आता था when because I always wanted things a certain way. And as I was growing up, when I was growing up, I thought it was my pursuit for perfection.
So Vandana, do you also, sorry to interrupt, do you also think that, you know, anger is part of, like, it's hurt? If you sort of disclose your hurt for something, you know, you'll be less angry. It is, again, I feel that if you disclose hurt, there comes a power structure that I'm sort of weak if I show hurt. But if I am showing anger, means I am more powerful and people around me are lesser than me. So that is why, you know, anger is a more reactive and a more public, emotion. But if it is hurt, then we try to hide it. But actually, the other part of anger would be actually hurt, I think, where
Yes.
your expectations are not being met, and therefore you're feeling hurt, but you're not expressing it as hurt.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think the root is pain.
Right.
The root to a lot of our negative emotions at the end of the day is pain. And it helps to identify it as pain, because then you can see the other person is in pain.
Right.
It's useful because it tempers your own reaction, makes it more a response, I think. So certainly hurt, very important. But at the same time, I also think entitlement, expectation, when I was, and this was an important revelation for my own self, that, you know, your pursuit of perfection, or one's pursuit of perfection, whatever that means, is great, and it can really propel you towards your potential. But if it becomes unpleasant, either for you
an
or
end
for
in
anybody,
itself, in a way,
an end in itself, or if it's unpleasant in the way it's expressing itself, or it's making you feel unpleasant all the time because nothing is perfect, then you need to redefine it. So it's fine as long as it's a pleasant pursuit. And also, as the yin and yang, with the dot of the white and the black and the other way around, one realizes that actually perfection enfolds imperfection. Perfection takes embraces imperfection. That's what makes it whole. So how I understand that conceptually. Now, how do I bring that into my life? How do I use it from the smallest interaction to maybe the largest, a very momentous understanding of things? But it's possible to do it, and it's very, very useful. But what made me angry was this as well. And of course, grief. I find that when I was in grief, my reaction would be less tears and more anger. So, as you rightly said, Sheena, it is hurt and it's pain. And then to see that and understand it and tire of those actions. Say that, like, there has to be another way. And there is not just one, but several.
Right.
I think we're completely out of time. There was a question about suicides among the young. Would you like to, Kohli, just very quickly talk about why youngsters hurt themselves, suicide being the ultimate act?
Well, you know, how I see this is, and I don't tire of saying this, I think it's largely the times and the systems you're working within, because my concern is that when you are living in a world and surrounded with this technology, which is throwing stuff at you, you don't have time to process. There are very few spaces which are still and stable. And it's stillness that gives you resilience. It's stillness that gives you a sense of tolerance. And we are not allowing.
What about routine? You must mention that.
Yes,
routine.
Absolutely.
That's very important.
But routine for someone could be sitting 6 hours or 8 hours on or to a screen and playing video games. That could be routine as well. So I'm scared to bring routine in unless routine means a balance between physical activity and
Right.
health and mindfulness and going out and having real social integration. Of course, not
True.
during these pandemic times, but otherwise to understand the importance of that. So what happens is that because you're reactionary, there is no holding power. The more you're addicted, anything that is addictive will make us reactionary, and the more addicted you are to something, the more stimulation you need, the more extreme the stimulation you need, because you've already been there and done that. So our stimulation is becoming more and more extreme. It's like the choking game, that happened many years ago, and of course the blue whale as well. That you choke yourself to a point with a belt where you feel a certain way because the oxygen is cut off momentarily, and many young children died because you're seeking more and more extreme stimulation. So I think that's a terrible loop to be caught in, and I really, really stress for each one of us that technology is great. We won't be having this conversation. We won't be doing 10,000 things in our life without it. It's a great enabler. But really, when it comes to stillness and mindfulness and giving people, children resilience, they have to be engaged in some kind of a physical sport. They have to be able to use their bodies, their minds in a real sense, not just sitting across a screen. And that is really for parents to determine. I know it's difficult, especially if you're working, and it's easy to give a child an iPad, or it's easy. And now that online learning is going on, there are limitations. But it doesn't mean that we are not alert to the opportunities when that can be amended, or that something else can be brought into that space.
Okay. I think we've really it's now 75 minutes our conversation. So the time did fly, and partly it's because it's so wonderful to hear two experts, one author and one psychologist, talk about things that challenge us, and many of us some of us don't take seriously, and some of us don't really find an avenue or a reason or time to actually explore what is happening within our heads. So thank you very much, Vandana, for writing this wonderful book. I strongly recommend that everyone goes out there and buys it. Hinge, Rediscovering Emotional and Mental Wellness. And yes, you can also pose with your own book. You've written it after all. And thank you, Sheena, for reading the book and giving us, an expert view on what makes us tick, what makes us, what ticks us off, and what we need to do to reach that equipoise. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Stay safe, stay calm, and remember to pause when you're reacting like a pressure cooker. Good evening to everyone. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thanks, Sheena.